So I put my grams in there, 15 bags inside a sandwich bag. You know what I'm saying? When the passing periods come, nigga, meet me in my truck. I'ma get you together. Then I'm finna go to class like nothing happened. You know what I'm saying?
And these are all people you know, right?
These just people I know. I ain't really like just.
The feds don't just watch rappers for fun, they build cases. And right now, Zillionaire Doe looks like their next target. Here's a rapper who didn't just rap about the streets, he lived them. He bragged in interviews about trapping. He laced his lyrics with coded references to moving weight, and his entire image was built on the hustle. But when your own words line up with federal investigations, you're not just telling your story, you're giving the feds a blueprint. And that's exactly what's happening. Doe's own brother, Victor Scott Wingham, aka Johnny Joe, or JJ, as Zillionaire Doe would call him.
Originally, the record label was called DMD, That Is Most Dangerous. I'm saying my big brother, JJ, I'm saying my big brother, he in jail right now, free him. I'm saying he ended up coming up with the name.
Was scooped up in a federal raid, his neighborhood is crawling with surveillance, and the government is quietly piecing everything together. To them, he's not just an artist, he's part of a network. So the question isn't if the feds are watching Zillionaire Doe, the question is how long before they turn those eyes into an indictment. In this documentary, we're breaking down why the federal government might be building a RICO case on Zillionaire Doe, looking at his background, his transition into rap, the raids that shook his hood, and why his rise to fame might also be the reason the feds want to take him down. Early background. Before the music, before the flashing jewelry and music videos, there was the hustle. Zillionaire Doe's story begins in the trenches, where survival wasn't guaranteed and opportunity often came in the form of illegal risk. Long before his name ever hit a streaming platform, he was known in his city for trapping moving weight, stacking cash, and building a reputation that would later serve as the foundation of his rap persona. Doe grew up in a neighborhood where the streets weren't just background noise, they were the main stage. Police cruisers circling the block, corner hustlers posted up day and night, and the constant threat of raids created an atmosphere where crime wasn't a choice, it was the culture. For many young men, hustling was as common as clocking in for a 9-to-5. Zillionaire Doe fell into that cycle early, earning respect not from his music at first, but from the money he pulled in from trapping. What made Doe different, though, was his willingness to talk about it openly. In interviews that resurfaced online, he's seen discussing how he came up off the block. He bragged about the long nights, the re-ups, and the kind of money that, for a teenager, didn't seem real. This wasn't the polished, calculated storytelling of a rapper trying to look street. These were raw admissions that came from someone who had really lived it. The streets already knew his name, and when he finally decided to put his life on wax, the authenticity rang loud.
So do you have a quota for how much you want to make per week, or are you just doing this to get by?
Boom. All right. At the time doing that just was some shit to just do. But it had got to a point where I even was at school and I had he worked at this spot. You know what I'm saying? So he worked there on Tuesdays and Thursdays. You know what I'm saying? They selling grams, like bust down grams. So every Tuesday and Thursday, I go take him 2 zips and I profit $400 every Tuesday and Thursday. So in the morning, I live out here in Seagoville. In the morning, I drive to the south, pick my up. You know what I'm saying? I already bagged my shit up the day before. I give it to him, drop him off at the spot. And by the time I get done, leave, practice everything, on Tuesday and Thursday, I pull up on him. I pick up my profit. 400 was the quota on it Tuesday and Thursday. But pretty issue was more like just petty, just getting by, you know, just doing some shit.
At the same time, Doe's background paints a clear picture of why federal investigators might have him on their radar. The neighborhoods he operated in weren't just small-time spots. They were already under heavy surveillance. Local police reports describe the area as a hotspot for drug distribution, with multiple busts happening throughout the years. Doe was growing up in an environment that was basically a pipeline for federal cases, with law enforcement looking to connect the dots between individuals, crews, and larger organizations.
My big brother feds did a whole motherfucking indictment, you know what I'm saying, on my neighborhood, you know what I'm saying? But in the midst of that, I'm rapping, you know what I'm saying? You on the outside looking in, look like everything going good, but in real life, nigga going through real life shit. You know what I'm saying? So Mr. 14 months is like good and bad.
It's important to understand that Doe didn't come up as an outsider trying to rap his way into the streets. He was already there. Stories from people who knew him back then describe him as someone who always had cash in his pockets, someone who took pride in outworking others on the block. That reputation became the reason so many of his peers later vouched for him when he picked up a mic. For Zillionaire Doe, Rap wasn't an escape from the streets, it was an extension of them. But this dual identity, trapper first, rapper second, also put him in a dangerous spotlight. By his late teens, Doe had already drawn attention not only from his community but also from the law. The people around him, including his older brother, were deep in the same lifestyle. When the feds eventually started cracking down in his neighborhood, it wasn't hard to see why his name might come up in conversations behind closed doors. Looking back, it's clear that the seeds of Doe's federal problems were planted during these early years. His rise as a hustler built the credibility he needed to transition into rap, but it also created a paper trail, one that investigators could later use against him. The interviews, the stories, the open confessions about his past were all pieces of a puzzle the feds are still putting together today. In short, Zillionaire Doe's background wasn't just about music. It was about survival, respect, and ambition born in the streets. But those same streets that made him are the very reason he's now under federal watch. The transition to rap.
I never really wanted to rap, you know what I'm saying? Like, my big brother used to beg me every day, like rap, please rap, you gonna blow overnight, you gonna be an overnight success. Everybody just always begged me to rap, but one until one of my partners that passed away, my nigga Bill G. Strap, he passed away. Okay. And shit, like a few days before he passed away, he told me like, rap, like 2 days before he paid, like rap, you gonna pop. I'm a connection with my manager, bro, ended up dying. Bro could've told me this shit 10, 15 years ago. It had to be God for something. Somebody that passed 2 days before he tell me to rap and shit. Bro could've told me this shit years ago. You know what I'm saying? So I took that as motivation. It really made me do this shit.
For Zillionaire Doe, rap didn't start as a career move, it started as a voice. When you come from the environment he did, the streets are always watching, and credibility is everything. By the time Doe first touched a mic, his reputation as a trapper had already been sealed. He wasn't trying to prove himself to his block. They already knew him. What he was trying to do was take that same raw story and turn it into something bigger, something that could reach beyond the neighborhood. At first, his early tracks weren't polished. They sounded like diary entries laid over beats, gritty confessions that only made sense if you had lived what he lived. He wasn't rapping about Bentleys and yachts. He was talking about corner work, police harassment, and the paranoia that comes from watching the door at 3 a.m. For his peers, those bars were different because they knew it wasn't entertainment, it was reality.
I was just a young nigga with a scale and a dream. Ain't no better feeling violent, getting money with your team. Came a long way.
Doe's decision to rap wasn't random either. In an era where authenticity separates stars from pretenders, the streets were looking for someone who could actually tell their story. Local DJs, producers, and even rival crews began recognizing his music because it carried the weight of someone who had earned the right to speak on it. This was where Zillionaire Doe truly began to stand out. He wasn't inventing a character, he was amplifying his own. The breakthrough came when he dropped his first official visuals. Instead of expensive cars and staged mansions, his videos featured familiar blocks, known faces, and the same environment he grew up in. That move made him immediately relatable and kept his image grounded in the streets that raised him. His authenticity became his brand. Where other rappers used metaphors, Doe used memories. As his catalog grew, so did his fan base. Listeners outside his city began gravitating toward his music because it provided an unfiltered glimpse into the life of someone caught between hustling and artistry. The trapper-turned-rapper archetype wasn't new, but Zillionaire Doe's rawness gave it fresh energy. And as more people started paying attention, so did law enforcement. Lyrics are more than just rhymes in the eyes of investigators. They're treated as confessions, coded admissions, or even evidence. Doe's songs contain detailed accounts of street politics, coded references to drugs, and stories of situations that mirrored real-life events from his neighborhood. To the average fan, it was just music. But to the feds who already had open files in his area, these lyrics were more than entertainment. They were data points. That tension between art and evidence has followed Doe since his earliest releases. On one hand, rap gave him a legitimate platform, pulling him away from the streets and into studios, stages, and streaming charts. On the other hand, it put him under a magnifying glass. The louder his music got, the more people wanted to know who he really was. And unfortunately for Doe, he was too honest to hide. Another layer to his transition was timing. Doe began gaining traction at the same moment federal investigations were ramping up in his city. While he was gaining views, booking shows, and making money off music, his older brother and other associates were already dealing with serious charges. To the public, it looked like Doe was leveling up. To the feds, it looked like his rap career was being funded and fueled by the same activities they were investigating. That dual perception of rappers to fans, suspect to feds, created the perfect storm. Instead of his music being seen as a fresh start, it became evidence of continuity. Every bar he spit was potentially another piece of proof for prosecutors trying to connect the dots. In short, Zillionaire Doe's transition into rap wasn't just a career shift. It was the moment his private street life became a public record, the very thing that made him relatable. The honesty, the rawness, the street detail is the same thing that's now being held against him. What looked like an escape may have actually been the beginning of a bigger trap, one not set by the streets, but by the federal government. The feds watching. By the time Zillionaire Doe's name started buzzing in rap, the feds were already circling his neighborhood. Federal surveillance doesn't just happen overnight, it builds quietly, case by case, file by file. And Doe's environment was the type of place where those files stacked up fast. Local police had been raiding houses in his hood for years, but the shift came when those raids started involving federal task forces. DEA agents, ATF officers, and federal prosecutors don't waste time with small busts. When they show up, it's because they're chasing larger conspiracies, trying to connect crews, family members, and operations into one big case. Doe, whether he wanted it or not, was right in the middle of that spotlight. The biggest turning point came when his older brother was arrested during one of these sweeps. For law enforcement, family ties matter.
The feds came, you know what I'm saying, picked up my big brother. Feds did a whole motherfucking indictment, you know what I'm saying, on my neighborhood, you know what I'm saying, but in the midst of that.
Prosecutors don't just look at individuals, they look at networks. If your brother is caught moving weight, the assumption is you knew about it, benefited from it, or were involved in some way. For Doe, this wasn't just a family tragedy, it was a federal breadcrumb, one that investigators could use to link his name to larger operations. Street sources and neighborhood whispers suggest that these raids weren't random, they were coordinated efforts to break down the infrastructure of a long-standing trapping network. Doe's brother was just one piece, but his arrest showed the feds were serious about dismantling the entire pipeline. And because Doe had already rapped openly about trapping, paranoia, and the kind of money he made before rap, his music became the soundtrack investigators were studying behind closed doors. This is the reality of federal RICO cases. They don't need a single smoking gun. They build narratives. They use associates, family members, music lyrics, old social media posts, and surveillance footage to create a story. If the story makes sense to a jury, that's all they need. And in Doe's case, the story was almost writing itself. A rapper who admitted to trapping, whose brother was caught in a federal raid, whose neighborhood was a known hot zone for drug distribution, it was textbook RICO material. What makes it even more dangerous is how the feds watch success. The more visibility Doe gained from rap, the more curious law enforcement became about where that money was coming from. To the public, it was obvious. Streams, shows, features. But to investigators, the question was, did rap money really replace street money, or was it just another layer in a larger operation? One detail that stuck out to law enforcement was how quickly Doe seemed to level up once his music gained traction. Expensive chains, flashy cars, and high-quality videos all became part of his brand. To fans, it was a come-up. To the feds, it was a red flag. They asked, how did someone with only a handful of records suddenly afford a lifestyle rappers with major deals struggle to maintain? Add to that the fact that Doe never distanced himself from his neighborhood. Even as his fame grew, he continued to shoot videos on his block, surrounded by the same people who were under investigation. To the feds, that wasn't loyalty, it was evidence. Every cameo in a video, every background figure flashing money or weapons was another piece of potential proof that Doe wasn't separate from the streets, but still tied to them. By this stage, it was clear. Zillionaire Doe wasn't just a rapper in the eyes of the feds, he was a person of interest. His brother's arrest gave them leverage, his neighborhood gave them context, and his own music gave them a narrative. They didn't need to catch him red-handed. His life was already being documented for them. The streets may have crowned him a rapper, but to the federal government, Zillionaire Doe was becoming something else entirely, a suspect in an ongoing criminal conspiracy. And whether he realized it or not, every song, every post, and every association was being recorded and filed away. The feds want him by now. It's no secret that Zillionaire Doe has the kind of profile the feds love to target. To understand why, you have to break down the way federal prosecutors think. RICO charges aren't just about punishing a crime, they're about telling a story that convinces a jury an entire network is responsible for organized criminal activity. And Zillionaire Doe checks too many boxes to ignore. First, there's his past in the streets. Doe has openly admitted to trapping. And while that honesty made him authentic in rap, it also gave prosecutors direct quotes to use against him. Feds don't need to catch you in the act when you've already put it in your own words. His interviews, social media posts, and lyrics are essentially self-written statements. Every time he mentioned moving weight, re-ups, or hustling late nights, the feds weren't hearing art, they were hearing evidence. Second, there's the family connection. His older brother's arrest wasn't just a random event. In federal cases, family ties are treated as extensions of conspiracy. If one brother is caught trafficking, prosecutors argue the other brother knew, benefited, or participated in some way. And when the brother in question is locked up during a major raid targeting distribution networks, it doesn't take much for investigators to start connecting the dots. To them, Doe isn't separate from the operation. He's part of the family tree. Third, there's the environment. Doe's neighborhood has long been flagged as a hotbed for drug activity. Multiple busts, ongoing surveillance, and federal task force involvement all point to a place the feds consider a hub. Anyone tied to that block gets extra scrutiny. And because Doe never left shooting videos there, posting online from there, and associating with the same people, it created the image that he wasn't distancing himself from the activity, just documenting it for the world to see. Then comes the money. To fans, Zillionaire Doe's rise in rap looked like a success story, a hustler who flipped his grind into music money. But to the feds, it looked suspicious. They track financial records, and when they see an independent rapper suddenly driving luxury cars, wearing six-figure chains, and shooting high-budget videos, the question is always the same. Where did the money come from? Without a clear paper trail of major label advances or legitimate business ventures, the assumed ion is that the rap career is either supplemented by, or a front for, ongoing street activity. And finally, there's the optics. The feds love high-profile cases, especially ones involving rappers. Not only does it send a message to the streets, but it also creates headlines that bolster their careers as prosecutors. Charging a rapper like Zillionaire Doe doesn't just take one more hustler off the block, it becomes a national story, a trophy case they can point to as proof they're cracking down on organized crime. So when you add it all together, street admissions, family connections, a high surveillance neighborhood, unexplained wealth, and federal ambition, Zillionaire Doe becomes the perfect target. His life story already fits the Rico narrative. A young hustler who turned rap into a platform, stayed tied to his crew, and showcased everything the feds needed to build a conspiracy case. What makes it even more dangerous is that Doe hasn't shied away from controversy. Instead of distancing himself, he doubled down. Videos with large entourages, lyrics that reference real situations, and social media posts flashing money all reinforce the federal case. To the streets, it's branding. To the feds, it's corroboration. At the end of the day, the reason the feds want Zillionaire Doe is simple. He represents a high-profile opportunity. His authenticity, his rise, and his environment give them a story they can package into a RICO indictment. For the government, it's not about whether Doe is guilty of every accusation. It's about whether they can convince a jury that he's part of an ongoing criminal conspiracy. And based on the evidence they've been collecting, they're closer than ever to making that case. For Zillionaire Doe, rap gave him fame, but fame also gave the feds a front-row seat to his life, and once the feds are watching, they rarely look away. Zillionaire Doe's rise is the definition of a double-edged sword. On one side, he represents the classic American dream, the hustler who made it out by flipping his grind into music, building a following, and living the life that so many of his peers never got the chance to. On the other side, his story is exactly the kind the feds love to dissect. A man whose past, environment, and family ties paint the perfect picture of a conspiracy. What makes this case even more haunting is that much of the evidence the government could use isn't hidden. Doe's own lyrics, interviews, and visuals lay out a timeline of a young man who went from the block to the booth without ever cutting ties to the life he rapped about. For fans, that's authenticity. For prosecutors, that's a confession. And that's where Zillionaire Doe's future hangs in the balance. The same honesty that made him a star could also make him the centerpiece of a federal indictment. His brother's arrest, the raids on his neighborhood, and the attention his music has drawn have all put him squarely in the feds' crosshairs. The streets gave Zillionaire Doe his story, and rap gave him a platform. But now, the feds may be the ones to write his ending.